Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 27th of June in London. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Caroline Hepke at the City UK's annual conference, where the finance industry tells us Britain is in pole position to capitalise on uncertainty elsewhere. Plus, the gathering comes as Starmer and Sunak have gone head-to-head in a TV debate for the last time before next week's UK general election. We'll dig into their pitches on tax and growth.
Meanwhile, in France, former President Francois Hollande says he'll help build a unity government to block the far right from gaining power. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Britain's finance industry is well placed to benefit from growing political uncertainty in other nations, according to the group that represents much of the sector in the country. The bullish sentiment comes as recent data from EY showed London still leading European cities in attracting foreign direct investment into financial services. The CEO of the City UK, Miles Selleck, now says that the capital is well placed to benefit from a political consensus focused on delivering stable government.
You know, the UK actually looks like the politically stable option amongst the major economies, certainly in the West. So from our point of view, the better the relationship with the EU, the more beneficial that tends to be in terms of just smoothness of working, ease of working together, a desire to do things together. What I don't expect is any radical shift immediately.
However, the City UK's Miles Selleck also warned that whoever wins the election will need to achieve rapid growth or face a tough choice between higher taxes or lower spending. That's likely to prove challenging, with the Bank of England forecasting a growth rate of just 1.25% in 2026. Meanwhile, according to a Snap poll, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak tied the final televised leaders' debate of the UK general election campaign last night. Economic proposals featured heavily during the BBC event, as the Labour leader Keir Starmer set out his party's plans on taxation.
We have set out in our manifesto all of our plans that we will not be increasing income tax, national insurance or VAT.
Keir Starmer there, who also labelled the Prime Minister as being out of touch with voters. Rishi Sunak, meanwhile, retorted by questioning the clarity of Labour's own fiscal proposals.
I've set out my plans clearly, and I appreciate, actually, that not everyone's going to agree with me. Keir Starmer is not being straight with you about his plans to raise your taxes. I don't think that's leadership.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also repeated previous claims that a Labour government would raise the tax burden, which Starmer said was false. But despite both leaders' claims, Bloomberg Economics predicts that whoever wins the election, the next administration will need to find £20 billion in additional revenue to deliver current spending plans.
The former French President Francois Hollande says he's ready to build a coalition to govern after the elections if the results deliver a hung parliament. Hollande is running as a candidate for the left-wing New Popular Front alliance. He told French channel BFM TV that if neither his group nor the far right win a majority, he'll help to negotiate a unity government.
I think it's the role of figures like me, given the position I've held, to find solutions, because we must find solutions. If there isn't a majority under the Constitution, we can't go back to the voters for 1 year. What do we do for a year? Let the country fall apart? We must find solutions, because decisions need to be taken.
Francois Hollande speaking through a translator. Polls show the far-right National Rally is set to take the largest number of seats in Parliament, ahead of the left's New Popular Front and the President Macron's group in third. But surveys also indicate it's unlikely that anyone would have an absolute majority. European Union leaders are poised to nominate Ursula von der Leyen for a second term as European Commission President. They're also expected to select former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa as European Council President and Estonia's Prime Minister Kaja Kallas as Foreign Affairs Chief. Von der Leyen's nomination would still need to be confirmed by the European Parliament, where she may struggle to win a majority of votes. In the United States, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are set to return to the debate stage, but their upcoming head-to-head could be defined by some new guidelines. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has more.
The rules have been drafted by CNN and agreed to by both campaigns. First moderators Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, and their control room will have control of the mics. and the mics will be muted unless it is the candidate's turn to speak. Second, there will be no live studio audience to react to what traditionally have been called moments in the past debates. Biden won the coin flip, meaning he will stand at the lectern to the speaker's right, and Trump will get the closing statement. 90 minutes with 2 commercial breaks. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
The era of big paychecks for Chinese financiers is fast coming to an end, according to exclusive reporting from Bloomberg, as some of the industry's biggest companies imposed strict new limits to comply with President Xi Jinping's Common Prosperity campaign. China's largest financial conglomerates have asked senior staff to forego deferred bonuses and in some cases return pay from previous years to comply with a pre-tax cap. Here's our executive editor for Greater China, John Liu.
What we know is that the cap that's been put in place is about 2.9 million yuan. It's about $400,000 US on an annual basis before tax. We know that conglomerates including China Merchants, China Everbright Group, China CITIC, they've been telling some of their employees that they will not be making more than that cap, that any bonuses that they were owed over that amount will not be paid. And some of those employees are even being asked to return some of the pay that was in excess of that amount from previous years.
John Liu also points out this all comes as China's economy struggles to regain momentum in 2024 as confidence craters among domestic consumers and international investors. Well, Caroline, you are at the annual conference of the financial industry lobby group, the City UK. What a well-timed event this is, just a week out from the general election. Lots to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Bloomberg, of course, also this week hosted the business debate between Kemi Badenoch and Jonathan Reynolds, as you say, with just a week to go until the vote. There was also a big leaders debate last night on the BBC between Starmer and Sunak. Yes, it's a fabulous, hot and sunny day in Westminster. So we're right by the Houses of Parliament, but we're talking about finance at the City UK's annual conference. We haven't actually heard that much from financial services or business leaders who, of course, at the beginning of the campaign, just over 100 of them put out a public letter backing Labour. So this is very timely. Currently, investors are also much more bullish on sterling, according to the CFTC data. There's also seems to be a lot more interest and a lot more faith in UK stocks, especially mid-cap stocks. A lot of that is to do with more instability elsewhere, at least uncertain votes in France and the US. So I've been speaking to the City UK CEO, Miles Selleck, talking about the situation here in the UK, where we've had 5 prime ministers in 8 years, only 2 general elections, another one in a week's time. They are very reassured by the level of engagement, high level of engagement that they've seen from the Labour Party. I mean, he did talk about both the main political parties reaching out a lot to the financial services, but especially focused on Labour, who are so far ahead in the polls. He was saying, Miles, that the engagement by Labour has been the best since Tony Blair in 1997. So they've been reassured by that engagement, and that Starmer has been adamant that there'll be no major surprises for the industry. But of course, there is huge focus on what are the mechanisms going to be for delivering economic growth to the UK. Everybody wants to see that, but how is that actually going to happen? In the short term, there may be a lot of energy. That's what Miles Selleck is expecting from the Labour Party. If they were to win, let's say, or any new government, that there would be much more energy. But actually, it's about the medium-term outlook for the UK. This is what Miles Selleck had to say on that.
I think there is absolutely a question to ask here, that if the assumptions that are made on growth being able to deliver aren't upheld, don't actually happen, do we find ourselves in 18 months, 24 months, where you have a government that is going to have to reach to the lever marked higher taxes?
So Miles Selleck there talking about what may happen further down the line. So I think that is the issue. If growth can't be delivered quickly, what happens then when we all understand the limited amount of fiscal headroom that the UK government has?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly going to be a challenging situation for whoever wins the election as well. I mean, specifically, what does the City UK and the financial industry want to be hearing from this new government? We talk a lot about, the quite American concept in politics of the first 100 days of a government. What would those 100 days look like if the City UK got their way?
Yeah, of course, the parliamentary system in Britain does work differently. Selleck was happy that both parties are signed up to the Financial Services and Markets Bill, which is sort of the main bit of change, really, in the UK. Also, he was very positive about the Windsor framework, about the Edinburgh reforms that the Conservative government has brought in. But he pointed to a couple of interesting issues. On regulation, I think everyone here wants to understand whether the burden of regulation is going to be greater under the next government or whether it's going to be reduced. And obviously people want it perhaps not necessarily to be reduced, but at least to be focused more on allowing beneficial risk taking in the UK, i.e. growth risk taking. So Miles Selleck saying that, maybe it's within the Labour Party's DNA to focus on consumer regulation, but outside of things that are specifically focused on consumers, they expect regulators to come under much greater scrutiny to deliver more for Britain. Also, when it comes to Europe, again, seen as a major tool or major lever that the UK could use to try to improve growth. The mood music is better thanks to the Windsor framework, but actually Selleck says that he doesn't think that there's going to be any radical renegotiation on the UK's position with the EU. In the first couple of weeks, there will be the European Political Community meeting here in the UK. Lots of European leaders will be here on the 18th of July. That may be an important sort of moment to kind of re-establish the UK's ties with the EU, but it's not going to mean anything radically different, maybe.
OK, Caroline Hepker live at the City UK annual conference. Thank you very much for joining us. But let's stay with that European theme, and European Union leaders set to nominate Ursula von der Leyen for a second term as Commission President when they meet later. A deal on the EU's top jobs will also see European Council presidency go to the former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa, and Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas will become the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security. Let's go to Brussels and speak to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook for more. Oliver, how difficult a deal was this to negotiate to get these top jobs done?
Yeah, well, Stephen, it was a lot harder than anyone had anticipated. I remember that, we had it from a number of sources ahead of last week's meeting that basically this was all set and done and that they were going to just sort of rubber stamp this and it was going to fly through the leaders. That obviously did not happen. And we've heard some of the similar things coming into the meeting today. So let's see what happens. But as you say, these top jobs, the sort of Commission President, the Foreign Affairs Chief, and the European Council President, these are extremely crucial, and everything basically trickles down from there for all the other commissions. But also what they need to do today is also hammer out the strategic agenda, which is basically this policy document that sets out the sort of architecture and the outline for the EU and its policy priorities for the next 5 years under this new government. In there, you'll find all of the sort of similar themes of Ukraine, defense, and competitiveness. And of course, Zelensky will be here as well today.
Yeah, indeed, and that's going to be a key issue in focus as well. But just on the mechanics, so that we're expecting the leaders to sign off on these names today, although I note your note of caution from the expectations around the last meeting on this. Then, of course, it has to go to the European Parliament and they have to approve Ursula von der Leyen in the job for another 5 years. How difficult is that going to be?
Well, I think that is where kind of one of the wild cards could emanate. But of course, let's not forget also, Stephen, that we also have to sort of appoint the formal jobs and the formal institutions of power within the EU. There's also a lot of soft power that we need to sort of begin to sort of worry a little bit about. I mean, Meloni yesterday in Italian parliament absolutely scathing about this sort of process of how this goes, the job appointments has gone. Unfortunately for her, she does not actually have a voice in appointing the top jobs directly, but where she could have some influence is in exactly what you're talking about when it gets to the European Parliament, because as you know, these are secret ballots. This goes in front of all of the members of Parliament, and you need a majority there. And maybe you have maybe not everybody in line on the S&D side supporting von der Leyen. And if you don't have that support from Meloni, or you have a sort of a bloc going there, you could have a serious problem for getting that through the Parliament.
Yeah, indeed, that's going to be the next policy or the next hurdle, I suppose, for this process to overcome. Talk us through then, you mentioned Vladimir Zelensky, the issue of, how the EU approaches Ukraine in the future now, things like defence and security. What should we be expecting?
I mean, these are going to be very big questions. Let's not also forget that the EU presidency now goes to Orban and Hungary on July the 1st, which obviously hangs over all of this. Orban, who's been blocking a lot of the sort of EU funds that are supposed to be going to Ukraine. But the expectation for today, Zelensky will begin the sort of meeting with the EU leaders. We're expecting a sort of formal security pledge from the EU, kind of formalizing some of the things they've really agreed to for the time to go forward. There's, of course, also the question of the frozen Russian assets. I mean, from that G7 agreement, it's still an IOU. They need to work out the mechanics of that. But let's also not forget something else that happened this week, which was pretty crucial, is the beginning of formal accession negotiations of Ukraine joining the EU. That began earlier this week, and that will be a topic in front of everybody here in the EU. And it's sort of very significant symbolically because, of course, this whole war with Russia, which began back in 2014, was really on that very subject of the Ukrainians kicking out the sort of Russian-leaning president and trying to move more towards the EU. And so that will begin. Of course, though, there's nothing really concrete that comes with that. And there's, all these questions about whether the ammunition and all that stuff is actually making it to Ukraine. But from a symbolic perspective, this will be a sort of very significant conversation happening in Brussels today.
Well, alongside those conversations, the backdrop, of course, is there's an election looming in France as well. How does that fit into the dynamic in Brussels?
Yeah, Stephen, I mean, this is really the elephant in the room for Macron and really has been ever since those EU elections. And, it will mean that basically a lot of his sort of priorities, his sort of initiatives will fall down the ladder. I mean, he's been one of the most vocal advocates about joint debt and to build out European defense. But there's obviously also a consequence of what kind of government we get out of France and what that will mean for the EU. And both on the left and on the right, it's going to create some problems for the EU. From the left, already we know the fiscal situation in France is very strained, violating the EU's budget rules. So if the left comes in, there's much more deficit spending. That could be a problem. Le Maire was sort of, saying that there are concerns around Frexit. And on the right, we heard it for this week from Jordan Bardella, in the debate that they basically want to fund a lot of their initiatives within France by cutting their contributions to the EU budget. So all of this will bear in Brussels.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.